Hi, and welcome to Shep's Chat 201. This is Chapter 2, which focuses on the Constitution and kind of the road to how we get our new Constitution. The learning target for Chapter 2 are as follows. There are 5 of them. You're going to explain the theoretical and historical factors that influence the writers of the U.S. Constitution. You should already know a couple of those from our last chapter. You can think about Hobbes and Locke when it comes to that. Describe the structure of the Articles of Confederation and explain why the Confederation failed. That's going to be our first governing document, the Articles of Confederation. And clearly it doesn't work out that well because we now call it the U.S. Constitution. 3, identify and explain the compromises made by the delegates to come to an agreement on the U.S. Constitution. So at the Constitutional Convention, everybody kind of wants something different. We have to figure out how we can all get along. 4, explain the rationale for and give examples of the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances in the U.S. Constitution. And number 5, demonstrate understanding of the formal and informal processes for amending the U.S. Constitution. As we go through the rest of the term and the year in general, we will go into a lot more detail on specific parts of the Constitution. This chapter just kind of provides a general overview of the Constitution itself and how we get it. So when you start off reading this chapter, you get to your what if section, and it goes, what if this Constitution had banned slavery outright? Well, we already know from reading Founding Brothers that that really wasn't that easy of a possibility. In your text, it talked about the 1790 census and how it showed the division of African Americans and slavery during this time period and how the South was so dependent on it. And if we wanted to keep our country one coherent group of 13 colonies, eventually 13 states, we weren't going to be able to ban slavery outright. James Madison is quoted as saying, "Great as the evil is, a dismemberment of the Union would be worse. If those states should disunite from other states, they might solicit and obtain aid from foreign powers." So not only are they afraid of not being one united country, but what if France comes in and offers the South something better? And then the northern United States, which would only be a few states, would then be neighbors with enemies. So what do you think about it? Historical context is critical. You have to remember that although slavery is really, really, really bad, no matter what the time period, the founding fathers had to weigh the consequences of outlawing the process. All right, colonial background. England's first successful colony is in Jamestown, which is located in Virginia, and that comes about 1607. Calling it successful seems a little, I don't know. It's not really all that successful. Most of the people there die. However, enough of them make it that it's considered the first successful colony, and they are chartered, which gives them full power and authority to make laws. It is also the first example we have of a representative assembly. So the people of Virginia elect people to make decisions on their part. New England also has their first colony, which is religious refugees. So if you think of like the pilgrims, and those are separatists who want to break free from the Church of England. So they come over here as religious refugees, and they are more in the north. The Mayflower Compact is going to be the United States' first example of the social contract theory. And the new colonists come over here, and they're afraid of civil disobedience. Prior to this, they had a king or they had some sort of central government that would make sure that people were following the rules, and if you didn't follow the rules, there was punishment. The Mayflower Compact builds on this theory of social contract where we give up some of our rights, and in return, we expect the government or the people in charge to protect us. There are 13 original colonies: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Now, I'm sure Abby is writing all of those down, and it doesn't hurt to have them memorized, but it's not going to be on the test. You're not going to have to memorize all 13 colonies. That's more of a U.S. history type of thing. The 13 colonies enjoyed limited government under British control, so they had a lot of liberty. They got to make a lot of their own choices. They got to make a lot of their own laws. They had actual governing documents. So we had the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the Massachusetts Body of Liberties, the Pennsylvania Frame of Government, and the Pennsylvania Charter of Privileges. And these are some of our very first documents that are going to be the basis of the future Articles of Confederation or even the Constitution later on. And these 13 colonies viewed themselves as independent from each other. You were not an American, clearly, because you were still a British person, but you belonged to Massachusetts. You belonged to North Carolina. You were not an American. All right, so those jerks. Why do we get mad? What happens that we get so upset? So if we think about Shep's Chat 101, the very first thing we talked about was taxes. And what are taxes for? Taxes are for providing services. And in this case, Great Britain starts taxing the colonists because they had provided them with some services. So prior to the American Revolution, Great Britain had fought a war against France in what we refer to as the French and Indian War. Great Britain fights this war protecting the colonists. The deal is it puts Great Britain into quite a bit of debt. Great Britain feels that it is fair to tax the colonists and make them repay them for their services. The colonists, they kind of disagree. They had all this liberty and all this freedom, and all of a sudden they're like, you can't tax us. And so they say, well, we just won't buy Great Britain stuff then. So Great Britain says, yeah, but we're still in control, so we're going to tax all the other stuff then. And then the Americans, they get a little crazy and they start destroying property. One of the most famous incidences of this is the Boston Tea Party. And once again, not going to be on your test because it's more of an American history thing, but just a quick refresher, the Boston Tea Party is a bunch of colonists / founding fathers, probably have a little bit too much to drink at the local tavern, dress up as Native Americans, get on a ship, and pour all of the tea into the Boston harbor, destroying a great amount of property and value. This leads Great Britain to put into service the coercive acts, which we call the intolerable acts because they're just so terrible that we will not put up with it. And one of that is it places Massachusetts under direct British control. And that's until they can pay them back for the tea that they had lost. So, who was wrong? Because the way I just explained it, it doesn't really sound like Great Britain was doing anything that would be out of the ordinary. They had protected us in a war. They had lost funds because of it. They were trying to recollect those funds by taxing us. We are their colonies still. They tax us. We don't follow the rules. They punish us. And then we get mad and destroy their property, and then they get even more mad. So, at the same time, you have to look at it from the colonist perspective. Why should Great Britain control us? They are really, really far away, like 3 months in the Atlantic Ocean away. Who's to say that they should have all this power over us? So who was wrong, the colonists or Great Britain? That's going to be one of the things that we're going to talk about in class, probably before you watch this Shep's chat, though. Okay, so the colonists say it's just not acceptable, and we're not going to put up with this. And each colony sends a delegate to Philadelphia, and they hold the first Continental Congress in 1774. 12 out of the 13 colonies show up. Georgia is not there. They're the only one. And they start setting up armies and local governments. So although we are still part of the British Empire, we are setting up our own local governments and armies. By 1775, we have the Second Continental Congress, and we set up an army, and we name George Washington as our commander. However, the Second Continental Congress would be quick to say that we are not breaking away from Great Britain. Instead, they say, we have not raised armies with ambitious designs of separating from Great Britain and establishing independent states. They are just protecting themselves at this point in time. However, the average colonist does not feel quite the same way. Thomas Paine writes a pamphlet called Common Sense, which becomes like an American bestseller. And the average colonists are actually reading this, and it unites the colonists behind the idea of, why are we letting Great Britain rule us? Who said that they should rule us? Who put them in charge? Why are they in charge? And then they start to think, we could form our own government. We could do this. So Thomas Paine, his idea of common sense is that it just makes common sense that we could be free. Europe and not England is the parent country of America. So what he's saying is a lot of us aren't even from Great Britain. Why are we being ruled by the English? So you remember a couple of years ago, we had Arab Spring. Well, in 1776, we had American Spring. And in April, the United States declares that they will start free trade with all countries besides Great Britain. And then in May, all colonies have set up their own government separate from Great Britain. And then in July, we officially declare independence. And that would be the whole July 4, 1776 debacle. Which, is that a big deal? Or is that not a big deal? Because as you remember from reading Founding Brothers, Thomas Jefferson would tell you, big deal. And John Adams would say, no, July 4, 1776 really wasn't all that meaningful. What is the legal significance of July 4, 1776? Nothing. We'd already started fighting. We'd already set up our own governments. However, it has a lot of moral significance. It brings the colonists together, it unites them, and it shows other foreign nations that we mean business and we plan to be our own country once we break free from Great Britain. So, in that Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson steals some ideas from John Locke, and Locke's ideas of life, liberty, and property become Jefferson's idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. declaring that we all have certain rights, and the purpose of government is to protect those rights.